Humans of the cardboard, welcome back to Just Nuts, guys. I don't really do a ton of videos like this, but today I actually want to do a video talking about a very specific side deck tech card that I think is pretty interesting. Could have more important notes with actual Cyber Dragon builds, but it's just Cyber Dragon himself. He's a really interesting card. I kind of like what he brings to the table quite a bit as a side deck card, specifically versus Sprite. Tier, I'm not going to show an example for Tier here, but just because Tier is so weird right now, it's one of those super open-ended archetypes with so many ways to play it, whether it's Punk, whether it's Danger, whether it's the Sprite version, right? There's just so many different ways you can play the deck right now, and they don't always end on a super similar board every time. So it's not as consistently good because you have to kind of figure out what variant you're on, because that variant could determine how useful Cyber Dragon's actually going to be. So anyway, we're looking at a standard Sprite-ish looking board. I mean, you've got Elf plus Totally Awesome. We've got the Sprite red on field, and let's just say one of these could be set. Let's pretend for right now neither of these is set, and then we'll talk about if it is. So obviously, first and foremost, you're just going to special summon the Cyber Dragon. Also, this Elf is your opponent's. I don't know how to flip it. Whatever. Just pretend it's your opponent's. I don't know. I don't use Dueling Book that often, so I'm trying to figure it out. So yeah, you're going to special summon the Cyber Dragon, because if only your opponent controls monsters, they just jump out of the hand, which is really nice. This is not an activated effect, so they cannot blue you, they cannot toad you here. Then from here, you just super simple. You're just going to go ahead and contact fuse off with the Elf, pretending that went to your opponent's grave. It doesn't really matter. And we're just going to go ahead and make a Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon. If you don't know what this guy does, he gains 1200 attack times the number of materials used for its special summon. Not a big deal at all. But now he's 2400, which is super huge right now because he is bigger than Toad and Red, depending on what the rest of your hand looks like. So from here, let's say if they just had the Toad and not the Red because they just did the super standard one card combo, you just Mega Fleet walk over the Toad, and you've essentially cleared almost the entire board, no questions asked. Now you may do that and they might still have the Red on field, but I'm still okay with that. Because you clear the Elf before you have to contest the Toad, they do not have the possibility of that turn reborning the Toad, so you don't have to worry about one Toad negate, let alone clearing it, them reborning it, and you have to contest the second reborn of Toad, or the second time he touches the field to handle his negate from that point. But I think all in all, I think for a package that takes one card from hand, not your normal summon, you don't activate any effects, and you clear the two most threatening cards, I would say, from your opponent's board, I think that's pretty damn good. Especially since Red is only 1800 as well, so if they also ended on the Red, you just need to put one other monster that's bigger than 18, and you can just walk the Red as well. So that depends on the deck you're playing, but that's not the hardest thing to do at all. And yeah, so I think about what if you just combined Zoo King Alpha with Chimera Tech Mega Fleet? You just cook your opponent with those two cards. You haven't normal summoned, you have 4 other cards in hand, and you probably still kept both those monsters on the field after clearing them. Now, the things you have to keep in mind are particularly these two. Kind of depends on where your opponent goes. If they have the combo where they started with a starter, so they don't really want to search, or so they don't really use it as an extender later on, so they actually end up searching one of these quick play spells and setting it in addition to their board. It just depends on what their hand specifically was. They would have Smashers, which is more important here than Starter. Starter's not as scary because what did they Starter for? If they have Red, they go for Carrot. If they didn't have Red, they just get Red. Not scary at all because those are completely reactive cards, not proactive cards that are threatening to clear your Cyber Dragon before you contact Fuse. The one that is more scary, though, is definitely Smashers, because if you go special Cyber Dragon, your opponent does have a chance to respond to the summon of Cyber Dragon, in which case they can just Smashers away the Cyber Dragon, plus one of their cards. But I do think at the end of the day, that's not even a bad trade. At least you bait the Smashers, which in my opinion is the most threatening interruption on their board. Non-targeting banish, very scary. If you play a Mystic Mine deck, you just got rid of their best Mystic Mine out. All you have to do is handle the Toad from there, and you probably win the duel by resolving a Mystic Mine, most likely, especially if it's game 1 and they didn't know you were on mine. there, and it works out, because if they're going to use Smashers, banishing another card, which would be, maybe it's a level 2 like Red that they already had, maybe it's Toad, but no, they wouldn't banish Toad. Maybe it's Elf because they play 1 or 2 more in the extra, but either way, they're 2 for 1ing 1 monster from you. The way they have to do that, you haven't gone battle phase yet, so you still have your battle phase to threaten, like the Toad specifically, without even giving them a great way to use its negate, potentially, depending on the deck you're playing against, if you can just plop a big body. And, like, they're down in resources. I mean, down in resources means they use 2 cards to get rid of your 1. You didn't normal summon. You didn't go battle phase yet. And they just used their most powerful interruption. I still think in those scenarios, the card still feels pretty worth to me. So yeah, long story short, I like it. And also, Sprite 2 kind of has a little bit of the tier element factor as well. Just the fact that it's a deck that right now the general consensus from like the high level players in the game are saying pure Sprite, not good enough. You need to be playing Sprite with either like some spicy text to make the deck interesting and better and not as easy to play against, or you just have to be playing like another engine with it. Like we've seen the Live Twin engine perform respectively well. You're seeing the Mysteroon engine now come to fruition. So that stuff obviously changes the setup here. But as far as the basic core Sprite setup, Cyber Dragon plays into it immensely well. I think it's a really cool thing. If you play a deck, I don't know, for example, like, well, not for example, but just theoretically, that has a decent tier element matchup, but actually has a worse Sprite matchup, even if you think tier is like overall the better deck in the format, it's just matchup based. Depends on the deck you play against. If you handle tier somewhat well, but you don't handle Sprite somewhat well, going second, maybe we just side a little Cyber Dragon action. That handles like the scariest portions of that deck's turn 1 setup for the most part, and then the rest of your hand, 5 cards in hand, should hopefully be able to take control of the duel from there. I think it's pretty sweet. I definitely think it's something to keep in mind. I just want to throw it out there because I've been looking at it and I literally thought of it myself because I was like, oh, you know what? Sprites are pretty... I actually thought of Phantasmic, so I was like, Sprites obviously do linking every turn, but if they use Gigantic, they lock you out of even being able to use Phantasmic, so that kind of stinks. Tier also goes into links fairly regularly, so I was like, Phantasmic could be good. And then I was like, you know what? What's another card that takes advantage of like a link heavier format? And I was like, Cyber Dragon can just contact fuse the EMZ. And with Elf specifically, Elf is, people say it all the time, like Elf's the best extra deck monster for Sprite. It really is. Gigantic is great, and it's almost like a card that baits interruptions, and then you go into Elf, the actual best card in the extra. But this card handles that really, really well. So I thought of it, and then I literally saw that like some of the higher end players, I say higher end players, but like I heard like Nesh and Pack talking about it as like a really interesting side deck card. And I wanted to talk about it here a little more in depth here and show the specific situation here. I'd love to see a scenario where I'd love to see more testing on this, to be honest, as it pertains to tier element and how consistent it can be versus multiple tier element builds. But also, if you play game 1, you might know what build you're playing against. If you know it's one of the link heavier builds, cool. If it's not, if it's like a more pure variant that's like very fusion heavy, maybe you leave it in the side. But I don't know. It's an interesting pick nonetheless. Definitely versus Sprite, potentially versus tier. We'll just have to see with more testing on that. But thought it was really cool. Wanted to definitely throw that at you guys. But yeah, that's what I got for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I want to know your guys' thoughts on this text specifically. I've been looking for side deck text for a couple of my decks that I've been messing around with. Tier is really scary because I think it's just the most... It's the hardest deck to like pin down, especially depending on how your game 1 goes. You may not even be able to pin down the exact build you're playing against, and because there's so many different builds, and they end on different things, it is so hard to like accurately side super effectively. I know there are going to be some cards that go across them, but I'm just looking for side deck solutions, just in general, as a rogue player, to try and like help take on the meta. And this is one of my spicier techs. So let me know your thoughts on this card specifically, Cyber Dragon versus Sprite, and even a little bit versus tier, just opinions on that and just in the format overall. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, as well as, of course, the ability to, oh my gosh, any other side deck cards that you think are like particularly interesting and spicy that definitely pertain to at least those top 2 matchups, if not other stuff in the format. But I'm out of here. Thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to the channel for more stuff from your boy down the line, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.